I'm here at the European Development Days in Brussels, and with me is Ute Hausmann, Executive Director of FIAN Germany. Ute, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about what FIAN does, and I think you monitor Germany's response on human rights issues related to the right to food. So what are you finding as you evaluate Germany's policies?
Well, FIAN is an international human rights organization for the right to food. I work for the German section, so it's our main responsibility to monitor what the German government does in relation to the right to food, not also within its own country, but also how it impacts the right to food in other countries. So we do that on different levels. Of course, we look into individual cases. When we see that German state agencies or German companies are involved in human rights violations of the right to food in other countries, then we try to hold the German government and companies accountable. But we also look at policies. So we look into, for example, the effect of trade policies on the right to food in other countries. We look at the role that development cooperation plays, for example, in influencing land policies in other countries. And we also look at the role that the German government plays in international fora. For example, the Committee on World Food Security, which is the key international intergovernmental body discussing issues related to the right to food and food policies.
And what are you finding now with regards to German policies? What is Germany doing right? What is Germany doing wrong? And what can it do differently?
German government has played a very important role that the right to food is actually recognized more strongly on the international level, has been very active in that, has helped to set up and develop, negotiate the FAO guidelines on the right to food, and also now the guidelines that have been developed within the Committee on World Food Security on land tenure. Germany has played a very important role, so we commend them for that. At the same time, we see in other fields where there's economic interests, it's a lot more difficult. So if you look at the role of trade, for example, if you have cheap agricultural products that are being dumped in countries in Africa, for example, we have looked at the impact of chicken or tomato imports in those countries and how it actually destroys livelihoods of peasants. And that in turn actually means that we have to look more strongly at how trade negotiations take place, who's participating in it, and also what are the results in terms of the agreements that are being reached. For example, we're highly critical of the partnership agreements between the European Union and other countries because there the level of tariffs is reduced so much that actually the governments don't have many instruments left, how they can actually control what is coming in the country, how it impacts peasant farmers, for example. So that would be an example of a policy issue that we're looking at.
You mentioned development cooperation. The current ruling government coalition in Germany has made an increased focus to engage the private sector and also to use development cooperation as a means to open up new markets for German companies. Nothing new, perhaps, that company representatives accompany an aid minister on foreign trips, but this seems to be somewhat of an increased trend here right now with the German government. Is it getting more difficult then to achieve your mission?
Well, the problem is that these cooperations with the private sector are not really monitored well in terms of their impact on human rights. Actually, if we ask the German government to provide evidence how they actually want to implement a human rights approach in their cooperation with the private sector, they don't have much to offer. And actually next week we will have a big conference organized by the Ministry for Development where we discuss about the implementation of the human rights policy of the ministry, and one of the focus will actually be the private sector. So I guess my role in that conference will be to point out that we have initiatives that must be seen highly critical. For example, the G8 New Alliance on Food Security and Nutrition, which has been developed without any involvement of those people who should benefit from it, which is local farmers, which is fishermen, which is nomads, for example. Those are the people that are hungry today. They're not having any role in developing the strategies of this new alliance. And if you see, for example, I have looked at the project documents for Ethiopia. For example, you see the alliance claims that they will combat hunger, but if you look at the indicators of what they want to achieve, they want to improve the doing business index of Ethiopia. So we're really, we're claiming, or the governments are claiming, companies are claiming they do have an important impact on combating hunger, but they don't present the proof.
The G8 initiative has been lauded broadly by a whole bunch of world leaders. Now, what do you see as ways to improve it or steer it in the right direction, or is it already too late?
It's never too late, I would say. Thing is, we have, with the World Food Crisis 2007-2008, world leaders also recognized that there had to be a reform of the world food system and how it is governed. So there was a reform of the Committee on World Food Security, and it's actually a best practice, I would say, for how the discussion on development should take place on the international level, because what happened there, for the very first time in these kind of fora, we have separate slots for those people who are affected. So actually now, if you go to the Committee on World Food Security, which is actually taking place same time now in Rome, you will also find representatives of peasant farmers, of nomads, of fishermen, and they're there to discuss and to influence the policies that are being designed. Now the G8 initiative has popped up without any connection to those discussions, to this fora, which is intergovernmental, which has been, reformed as a consequence of the food crisis. And that is one of the things that we criticize most, that G8 is doing something and does not, relate it to a consensus that is actually being gained within the Committee on World Food Security. So what we're saying is that we want the Committee on World Food Security to play a role in evaluating what this G8 initiative is doing.
What are some of the upcoming milestones here for not just having single voices like yours criticize parts of those initiatives, but perhaps starting a movement? Is anyone really meeting to make this happen?
Well, I think with the post-2015 debates on, what is going to happen after the MDGs, what is going to happen in the post-Rio process, we have a lot of discussions going on. What is the future of development? So for us, very clearly, Committee on World Food Security has to be the fora where future of world food security is being discussed, and where where governments actually commit to specific action, and where they also commit to being held accountable.
What is your message to the private sector, to companies that are part of the initiative that was announced at the G8 summit? What do they need to do right now? What initiative can they take?
Well, first of all, I would say that they should be more, not try to influence policies too much in their interest. We see that where you have money, where money comes, policies are changed according to that. So, for example, yesterday there was this discussion on the SUN initiative, which is scaling up nutrition. Also a global initiative with a lot of money allocated. And of course, we're all for improving nutrition. But the problem is, if you allocate most of the money, 2/3 actually, to supplying fortified foods and changing legislation accordingly, of course governments will do it. They will prioritize on that, and they will not pay enough attention to the risks that fortified foods might also have. And they don't pay enough attention to other issues, for example, increasing access to productive resources for landless farmers.
What is your mission, your message then to aid organizations, especially the donors that are funding initiatives, projects, programs related to food security?
I would say they should really introduce a human rights approach to their programming. We are in discussions with the German government. They have a new human rights policy, as I said, and the German government is now implementing human rights impact assessments throughout the project. So if you are an implementing agency, if you submit a program for approval, you have to demonstrate that you have done your human rights impact assessment and that any project related to food security should also have a positive impact on the right to food. The other very positive development we see in the German case is that the government is now discussing with us, with others, with the implementing agencies to set up a human rights complaint procedure. So actually in the future, if people in other countries feel they're negatively impacted by German development cooperation, they actually have somewhere to go. They can bring in a complaint and their case will be heard. And our hope is that we get a very strong complaint procedure which is independent, which is based on human rights, and that it will not only have an impact in individual cases, but also continuously help us to improve policies of the donor countries, in this case the German, but also to in the policy dialogue with developing countries' governments, that it will have an impact there as well.
You bring up many important points and that we'll have to watch very closely. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to Devex.